My Hero Academia, All Grown Up. Chapter 38. Uraraka hadn't felt so exhausted in her life. She'd been cleaning up mess after mess for almost 30 hours straight, and her body felt like it could give out at any moment. Thankfully, she was finally getting a break from it, and she dragged her feet through the hospital lobby. She stopped at the reception desk for some guidance before she pulled herself toward the elevator and went up. She was glad that she didn't decide to stop by her apartment before coming here, because she doubted that she would have left again. She couldn't help it, though. She was just so tired. But her work wasn't really over yet. Once she visited with Bakugou, she'd need to sort out the details of Cho's situation with Mirio. She would only be allowed to rest once she'd figured that out, and she tried to work out how many hours of sleep that might look like before she had to get up again tomorrow and go back to work. Agencies across the country had managed to quell the villains, but Uraraka had a sneaking suspicion that it was only because the drugs had worn off. As soon as the supply was re-upped, everyone would be going crazy again, and the heroes would be back at square one. That wouldn't be good at all. Everyone was exhausted, and many were also hurt. She hardly heard the new phone in her pocket ring due to her nearly dozing off to the elevator music, but thankfully, it pulled her from her reverie. She dragged it out and blinked at the unfamiliar number on the screen before she shrugged and answered. Hey, hello. She shook her head and tried to clear her head. Uraraka? Mirio's voice was unsure and hesitant. Is that you? Oh. She licked her lips as the elevator door slid open. Yeah, it's me. Sorry for making you wait. I was actually about to call you. It's fine. Your agency gave me your new number, and I just wanted to check in with you. Mirio sounded distracted on the other end of the call. I might have something for you. Uraraka had meandered down the sterile hallway of the hospital wing but stopped at his last sentence. You do? Yeah. His inflection dropped down low, but I think it's better for you to hear in person. Can you spare some time to come back down to Mizutofu? That way, we can sort this out together. Uraraka considered him, but her train of thought was interrupted when she heard a familiar voice yell something from around the corner. She smiled to herself as she recognized the antagonizing tone of Bakugou, and her limbs relaxed. Uraraka? Mirio's voice interrupted her again and she blinked. Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. She blinked her eyes hard. I got a little distracted for a moment. You need me to come back to Mizutofu? I think you'll want to. Mirio's voice suggested that whatever information he had, it would intrigue her. Can you make it? Besides, we need to figure out that other situation. The thought of taking a train ride all night made Uraraka's body want to give out, but she'd made a promise to Mirio that Cho would be out of his apartment by Monday. Yeah. She breathed out the word exhaustively. I'll catch the late train out, okay? I think it'll be well worth it. Mirio murmured back before he muffled the phone to talk with Cho in the background. Uraraka felt that the conversation was nearing its end, so she casually rounded the corner to see Bakugou snapping at a nurse that was attempting to help him put his arm in a sling. She smiled as she watched him glare at the flustered woman before his gaze snagged on her. She lifted her hand and waggled her fingers at him while he rolled his eyes, a playful glint in them. I'll text you the building code. Mirio's voice caught her attention once more. Just let me know when you're close by so I can unlock the front door for you. Got it. Uraraka yawned as she answered and slowly walked closer to the blonde's hospital room. I have to go, but I'll see you in a couple hours. See you then, Mirio replied, but Uraraka was already ending the call as she passed through the doorway. Bakugou sniffed at her as he finally relented and allowed the nurse to tighten the sling on his right arm. You look like shit. So do you. Uraraka's face went irritable as she rested her shoulder against the doorframe. Bakugou scowled back at her. Another couple of days, and I'll be good as new, so you're one to talk. Uraraka couldn't stop the next yawn on her lips, so instead of replying, she shook her head and covered her mouth. Bakugou simply watched her as she lazily crossed the room and slumped down onto a stiff chair, a spark of intrigue in his gaze. You really do look like shit. Thanks. Uraraka bit back sarcastically. I've only been working my tail off for 3 days straight. I'm running on 6 hours of sleep total here. How does that feel? The nurse timidly interrupted their conversation as she dropped her hands away from the blonde's shoulder. Do you want it tighter? Bakugou turned to scowl on her. It's fine. His tone was icy with irritation. Can I leave now? I'll get your discharge paperwork. The nurse flushed in embarrassment before she hurried from the room, paying Uraraka a nervous look as she passed. She's just trying to help, you know. Uraraka pointed her finger after the nurse. It wouldn't kill you to be nice to her. Nice. Bakugou echoed the word like it was foreign. Why the hell are you here, round face? Shouldn't you be sleeping or some shit? The brunette released a long breath before she glanced at the time on her phone. I wanted to see you before I have to go back to work tomorrow morning, but... She dropped the phone in her lap and threw her legs over the arm of the chair. I'm not even going to be able to do that. I have to go back to Mizurufu tonight to deal with. Well, you know what? I'll just have to sleep on the train or something. Bakugou analyzed the woman slouched in the chair, but he masked his concern. Why the hell are you going back? You need some fucking sleep. I have to. Uraraka replied dismissively and rolled her head back. I promised Mirio that I'd have her out by Monday morning. He just called and told me that he had some information for us too. It could be useful. She twisted her gaze back toward him. But enough about me. How are you? He blinked back in surprise. I'm fine. Isn't that fucking obvious? He shifted his arm in a sling and tossed a scowling pout back at her. You know what I mean. Uraraka heaved herself to sit up straight, but one of her legs still hung over the side of the chair, unable to bring itself into line with the other. You're going to make a full recovery? Bakugou glanced down at his battered arm and realized how lucky he was. Yeah. Good. Uraraka breathed and tilted her head against the wall, fighting the urge to close her eyes. Sorry it took so long for me to come see you. It sucks because I'll have to go soon, too. Bakugou kept a flat gaze on her while she attempted to lull herself back from exhaustion. He stayed silent for a while as sympathy for her grew in his chest. She looked like she'd been through the ringer over the last few days, and it was clear that she shouldn't be doing any sort of major traveling. Why don't I just go to Mizurufu for you? Bakugou spoke up suddenly, and his eyes widened at his own suggestion. He'd said it before he had the chance to finish the thought in his mind, but at that point, it was too late. He stared at her in slight surprise and waited for her to respond, but it never came. After a long moment passed, he realized that her eyes were shut and her breathing had slowed. Uraraka? She jolted a bit as her mind came back to reality. She reached up and rubbed one of her reddened eyes and swiveled her head upright again. Sorry, I'm just a little tired. What did you say? Bakugou sighed and scooted himself off the hospital bed before he slowly crossed the room to squat down in front of her. Just fucking go home and get some sleep. I can't. Uraraka went to work on sitting up again. I already told you that I have dash. I'll go to deal with Mirio and the brat. Bakugou interrupted her with a strict tone. You'll never make it. That seemed to irk her awake, and she cast a rude glare toward him. Excuse me? I'll be just fine. The blonde smirked at her before he reached his hand across to flick her on the forehead. I'm not insulting you, round face. I'm helping you. Uraraka scoffed at him. You have to rest and heal, Bakugou. It wouldn't be fair of me to pawn this off on you. She finally dropped her other leg down and pulled her torso up straight. Plus, you said it yourself, remember? You don't like Mirio because he's a chump or whatever it was that you called him. With Uraraka now sitting up, Bakugou had to look up at her from his squat. He gave her a smug half-smile. Yeah, he's a fucking chump all right, but I don't have shit to do anyway. It beats hanging around my apartment all night. I'm going either way, so you might as well go home and get some fucking sleep. The brunette held his gaze with a skeptical look before she relented and nodded at him. You really don't mind? Bakugou sniffed and stood up. Of course I fucking mind. Mirio sucks, but if I let you go like this, I'd suck too. Well, I can go with you at the very dash. No. Bakugou shook his head and looked down at her. Just tell me what the hell your plan is, and I'll get it done. I've gotten plenty of rest, and I've been bored out of my damn mind. He looked down at his sling and shifted his arm inside it. The pain had subsided quite a bit, but it was still tired and tender. Doing something productive would help him keep his mind off how frustrating it was to be injured, but he didn't want to clue Uraraka into that thought process. He heard Uraraka breathe a sigh of relief before she nodded and spoke up. I really appreciate this, Bakugou. I've been so dash. Bakugou cleared his throat to cut her off mid-sentence. Katsuki. A tense silence filled the room as their eyes met with uncertainty. Uraraka's mouth had fallen open in surprise at his sudden correction, and both of them were frozen in place as they each felt out the situation in their own minds. Bakugou had been thinking hard about them during his hospital stay, but the only conclusion he ever came to meant going back on his own decisions. He'd worried about her in battle and sent her away, but when he felt like giving up, the possibility of losing her had spurred him back to action. That had struck something deep within himself that he had been denying. He'd been pushing his feelings for Uraraka down to protect their jobs and reputations, but when it came down to the wire, he'd regretted that he hadn't enjoyed those feelings before it was too late. He was one lucky son of a bitch to actually have a second chance with her, so to hell with the jobs and reputations. There would always be opportunities for those things down the road, but when it came to Uraraka, that window of opportunity could close before he ever worked up the courage to acknowledge it. So he'd made up his mind almost immediately. He was blindly in love with her, and he was sick of denying himself. Katsuki, he corrected her again. Call me Katsuki.
Yeah.
Uraraka flushed with nervousness. Kat. She hushed her tone and blushed. Is that really a good idea? I mean, it's not. I thought that we were, waiting. His heart was hammering his chest, but he focused his mind on maintaining his lackluster demeanor. I changed my mind. Bakugou. Uraraka hissed at him, but a smile goes to her lips. I mean Kakatsu. Katsuki. Bakugou leaned down and pressed his palms against her cheeks, bringing her eyes up to meet his. Katsuki. It's not fucking hard. Why? Uraraka's eyes were wide open with shock, but her question was hardly a whisper. The blonde heaved a heavy sigh and softened his expression a touch. We don't have to talk about it right now, but I promise that I'll explain when we have the chance. Just go with it. Uraraka's gaze relaxed, and she pressed her right cheek into his hand. All right. Go home, kacchako. He smoothed his thumbs over her cheekbones before pulling his hands away and standing up straight. I'll deal with your shit in Mizurufu, and then I'll come see you as soon as I can. Uraraka felt like she'd been starstruck as she mindlessly rose to her feet. A funny smile splayed across her face. You'll hurry back, right? When he saw her adorably contented expression, his mouth went dry. Yeah, I will. Uraraka hummed in her happy days, and she resisted the urge to twirl as she stepped toward the door. I'll be waiting for you. She turned and blushed at him. Katsuki. He was grateful that she hurried away, because he was sure that his entire face had gone red. Nervous energy kept him from standing still, so he paced the room, attempting to calm himself. He swiped the hair over his forehead repeatedly to keep his free hand busy and his mind raced. Telling her to call him by name wasn't the plan for today. He had put it together in his head over the last 2 days, but their entire conversation now had made it feel like the perfect timing. Honestly, it was perfect timing, but now he'd have to go for a while before getting the chance to tell her the rest of his confessions. However, hearing her say his name had made his entire body feel light. He wanted to hear her say it over and over again. Damn it. He needed to go take care of this shit in Mizurufu as fast as humanly possible. Bakugou tapped his foot impatiently as he typed in the building code that Uraraka had forwarded to him a 4th time. The keypad blinked at him for a moment before it flashed a message back at him. Access denied. Oh, for fuck's sake. Bakugou clenched his jaw before he scanned the list of residents to the building. He took a deep breath before smashing the button beside Mirio's name. The speaker buzzed after a few seconds, and a voice replied. Uraraka? I thought you weren't coming until later tonight. Bakugou jammed the button again. She's not fucking coming. I'm here instead. There was a very long pause, and due to his impatience, Bakugou hit the button again. Are you going to open the damn door, or not? Finally, without a response, the machinery whined, and the door unlocked for the blonde. He stepped inside and kicked the door shut behind him before a noise ahead drew his attention. He looked up and saw Mirio exiting his apartment door and stalking down the hallway with a confused expression. Yeah, I fucking know. Bakugou shrugged off his coat, wincing at the pain in his slung arm. Neither of us want me here, so let's just get this shit done so I can leave. Where is Uraraka? Mirio glanced behind the blonde to peer through the window on the door hopefully. Is she all right? Bakugou frowned at the other man as he slung his coat over his arm. Yeah, she's fine. Where's the brat? She's asleep inside. Mirio stepped back and cocked his head at Bakugou's arm. What happened to you? The hot-headed blonde searched his mind for something snarky, but he knew that Mirio was already well aware of how he'd been injured. Does it fucking matter? I'm just trying to make conversation. Mirio shrugged. Why didn't Uraraka come with you? Did she get stuck at work? TCH. Bakugou shook his head, trying to come to terms with the fact that Uraraka had chosen Mirio of all people to stow away Teller's daughter. Kacchako's been working nonstop for 2 days. She needed a fucking break, and she felt too guilty to try and reschedule with you, so here I am. Mirio looked slightly stunned. So you guys are on a first-name basis now, huh? There was a puff of pride in Bakugou's chest, and he gave the other man a smug look. I don't think that matters either. With a blink and a nod, Mirio turned around again and waved for Bakugou to follow him inside the apartment. Once the door was shut behind them, Mirio made for the kitchen. Want a glass of water or something? I'm just here for the brat. Bakugou glanced into the living room but didn't see the girl. Where's she at? She's asleep in Aries' room. Mirio nodded his head toward the hallway. I'll go get her up in a minute. He put a crystal cup under the tap and filled it. He took a long drink and watched as Bakugou paced the small living room irritably. What? Bakugou snapped when he caught Mirio's blatant staring. The man in the kitchen shrugged and set the glass down. I'm just surprised to see you is all. Cho is a tough kid, but she was excited to see Uraraka. She might not show it, but she'll be disappointed. She's gotten attached to Uravity. Bakugou scoffed at that. Honestly, he couldn't give a shit less if the kid liked him or not, and he wasn't an idiot. Mirio was equally disappointed at Uraraka's absence. I'm sure she's not the only one. Are you going to get her, or do I have to do that shit too? Mirio chuckled, granting Bakugou the jab at him. All right. He meandered out of the kitchen, giving the other blonde a bemused look before disappearing down the hallway. Bakugou sniffed indignantly and tossed his jacket down on the sofa. He was about to take a seat when his eyes caught onto a variety of picture frames hanging on the wall. Curiosity tugged at him, and he found himself standing in front of them a moment later. Mirio was smiling in each one. The first photo was of he and Eri posing in front of the Mizutofu adoption offices. She displayed a certificate as he balanced her on his shoulders, and Bakugou felt a tug of an unknown emotion. Jealousy? No. This emotion was too warm to place in such a cold category, like envy. This felt more like intrigue. The next few pictures were of the pair in various places. They'd hiked Mount Fuji, visited a Kyoto shrine, and built sandcastles in Okinawa. He paused on the Okinawa photo to look at the background. It was a beautiful backdrop, and another emotion stirred inside him as an idea began to develop in his mind. Cho. Mirio's voice shattered the thought process in Bakugou. Do you remember Ground Zero? He turned around to see both Mirio and Cho standing at the mouth of the hallway. The girl frowned at him, and he scowled back. What? Yeah. Cho didn't answer him, instead choosing to respond to Mirio. I remember him being a gigantic asshole. A flare of anger crawled up Bakugou's throat, but before it could reach his tongue, Mirio spoke. That's no way to talk to a hero like Ground Zero. After all, he did help capture your father. He's one of the good guys, trust me. He's here to help. Cho glanced up at Mirio, but both men could see through the tough exterior she was wearing. So I have to leave now, right? Mirio flushed with guilt. Well, it's a complicated situation, Cho. I'd love for you to stay here, but I'm afraid that the law won't allow it. Well, you're already breaking it. Cho shrugged. I don't see why it matters now. Bakugou scowled. Oh, so we're just supposed to start breaking laws, huh? Our jobs aren't as important as your comfort. Mirio flashed Bakugou a callous look. I think what Ground Zero means to say is that Uravity found a really awesome agency that can take you in for now. He looked down at Cho. And you remember what we talked about last night, right? I do. Cho nodded her head, putting on a blank expression, but there was an undertone of disappointment in her words. If I work hard, then I can go to UA next year. Precisely. Mirio placed an encouraging hand on her shoulder. Besides, you won't be lonely at the agency. Bombshell is super fun to hang out with, and you know that I'll come visit you all the time. Maybe we can sneak you into the sports festival when it comes around, so you can see what UA is like for yourself. No fucking way. Bakugou shook his head dismissively. If you think Mies is going to go for any of that, then you're dash. I can assure you, Ground Zero. Mirio turned a terse smile onto the other man. You may be one of the more successful alumni of UA, but my connections there run much deeper than yours do. Bakugou narrowed his eyes at the other man, sensing a shift in their mutual dislike for each other. I guess anything is possible with all might in your corner. He shifted his weight on his feet and scowled. Kacchako told me that you had some information about the Mamushi group. Apparently this shit was so sensitive that she was going to bring her happy ass all the way out here to hear it after working for 30 hours straight. Mirio disregarded Bakugou's snarky tone and motioned for Cho to enter the room. Once all three of them were seated on opposing sofas, Mirio switched on the television to a recorded reality show from the night before. Here. He handed the remote off to Cho and nodded in encouragement. Show Ground Zero what you showed me last night. The girl accepted the remote and went to work fast-forwarding through the tape. When I was younger, my dad used to take me to this place all the time while my mom was out of town and nobody was around to watch me. I must have forgotten about it, but while we were watching this last night, I saw it and remembered it. She trailed off as she watched the screen for whatever it was that she was looking for. Bakugou leaned forward and glanced between the girl and the screen, skeptical about the girl's information. What do you mean? He'd take you to work with him? Or some shit? Well, I was really little. Cho shrugged and frowned at the screen. Oops, I think I missed it. She began backtracking through the show again, but this time she went much slower. But yeah, pretty much. When my mom was gone, he couldn't just leave me at home by myself, so he'd take me to work with him. At least, that's what I think I remember. It was a long time ago. Bakugou analyzed her body language, trying to pinpoint any signs of deception. So, you're telling me that the accountant for the Mamushi group couldn't find a fucking babysitter? I have a hard time believing that. Cho paused the show and turned a stoic glare on the blonde. He always worked alone anyway, so it was never really like a big deal that I went with him. Most of the time it was just us. Most of the time? Bakugou repeated back with a doubtful tone. Yeah, Cho frowned with indifference. And my dad wasn't always the accountant for the Mamushi group, you know? There was a guy before him that my dad worked for, so it wasn't like it is now. He wasn't some crazy, powerful supervillain until a few years ago. And money was tight back then, so a babysitter was out of the question. Bakugou leaned back on the sofa again and signaled for Cho to continue with her task. He watched in silence as she finally paused again and pointed at the screen. Okay, it's hard to see right here, but if you look that way. She stood up and walked up to the television. You see that? The building on the corner? Bakugou rested his elbows on his knees and squinted at the television. The shot was of two men talking on a busy street in Tokyo with downtown as their backdrop. Yeah, I guess. It really wasn't much, but the top of a business building was positioned slightly higher than the rest. It was rather plain-looking, resembling a typical, run-of-the-mill corporate office building. Cho licked her lips, pointed at it emphatically, and raised her eyebrows at Bakugou. That's it. That's where my dad works every day. Well, I guess worked is the better way to put it now. Bakugou didn't budge, but gave her a flat expression. The Mamushi Group's headquarters is in downtown Tokyo. He drawled the words out with doubt. Yes. Cho insisted and pressed her finger against the screen. Well, at least it used to be. I don't know about now. When my dad became the official accountant, he stopped taking me to work with him. But I've been there a ton of times. I even remember this one time that Constrictor randomly showed up in my dad's office to yell at him. I'll never forget it because Constrictor was super scary looking back then, and my mom told my dad that he couldn't take me with him anymore. Bakugou moved to cross his arms and flinched as he was reminded of his injury. Cho's story seemed outlandish at best, but she appeared to be sincere. Although, he was troubled by the way her family dynamics suddenly seemed so normal. Until a few minutes ago, he was under the impression that her father treated her poorly and that she needed to escape him. And that was only the beginnings of his doubts. The Mamushi Group wouldn't be dumb enough to station their headquarters in downtown Tokyo. The risk was just too high. Viper and his cronies were hopelessly recognizable, and if even one mildly informed citizen caught sight of them, it would be over. Listen to me, Cho interrupted his thoughts. I know I sound crazy, but you have to believe me. This is it. Mirio rubbed his chin as he watched Bakugou stare back at the girl with an unassuming look. What do you think, Ground Zero? I think it's a crock of shit, Bakugou scowled, and I don't think Viper would have been cool with your good old dad taking you to work with him either. The Mamushi Group isn't some corporate enterprise with bring your daughter to work days. It's the fucking mafia, or some shit. Cho crossed her arms and put on a rude face. Viper tolerated Constrictor and Cameo, but he loves my dad. And my dad works really hard for him. Viper used to bring me toys when he'd visit us, but when my dad took over the accounting for his mafia, or some shit, my dad changed. He used to be a great dad. Bakugou listened to her talk, but his opinion didn't shift an inch. Well, you clearly love your dad, so why the fuck would you turn on him now? You're not listening. Cho seethed and started to get worked up, but Mirio reached his hand up to try and calm the room. All right, everyone calm down. Mirio turned to look at Cho. Ground Zero is just trying to do his job, so please be patient with him. And you, he turned to look at Bakugou, should try being a little more open to the idea. Cho is trying to explain it to you the best she can, but you're antagonizing her. I expected more out of a high-ranking pro. Oh, can it? Bakugou rolled his eyes. This isn't her trying to convince me to let her get a puppy. She's informing on the most powerful villain in Japan and her own father. A real high-ranking pro knows how to do their fucking job, and we both know which one of us that is. Mirio stared him down for a minute before putting on a false smile. Can you and I speak outside for a minute? Bakugou frowned before nodding and rising off the couch. Mirio muttered something to Cho before he led Bakugou out of the apartment. Once outside, he turned around to face the grouchy blonde man and took a deep breath. Bakugou, what is your problem? Bakugou's face didn't give away anything. I don't know how you do shit here in Mizutofu, but in Tokyo, we vet our sea ice. She's a kid. Mirio crossed his arms and raised his eyebrows at Bakugou. And you're being a huge asshole. I get it. You don't like me, but you shouldn't project that onto her. Spare me the lecture about being nice to kids. Bakugou rolled his eyes. She burned down a fucking building and then ran away from Uraraka. Did you know that they had to break down the door to arrest her? Mirio ran a hand over his forehead. Yes, Bakugou, those things are bad, but she's learning why they're bad. You can't fault her for not knowing any better. Besides, her burning down that building was her way of lashing out at her father. She hates him, Bakugou. Hates him. Bakugou grunted indignantly. That's rich, Mirio. It's so like you to believe a kid you've known for 2 days has suddenly sprouted a heart of gold. If she told you that she was a unicorn, I'm sure you'd defend that to the grave. Mirio cocked his head away from Bakugou, clearly fighting the urge to say something harsh. After taking a moment to collect himself, he looked back, and what does it matter if I do? Kids are just dash. How do you not see the fallacy in that? All right. Mirio brushed his hands on his legs. Cho isn't the problem here, and we both know that. Just leave her here with me, and we can let Uraraka deal with this. Obviously, you don't give a crap about Cho or the information. Bakugou was slightly amused now, satisfied that he was able to get a rise out of Mirio. He had wondered if the man was truly as saintly as he made himself out to be. No, I made the trip all the way out here to help Kachako, so I'm not leaving until it's done. Mirio flattened his mouth into a thin line. You know, 2 days ago, Uraraka was referring to you as Bakugou. Then, all of a sudden, you show up and you're using her first name. Are you threatened by me or something? Bakugou scoffed, nearly bridging on genuine laughter. Fuck no. Then what is it? I told you that I would back off Uraraka, and I meant it. I'm not trying to steal her away from you, but I have to be honest. It's tempting after seeing you do it to Deku. Mirio almost looked smug, but Bakugou was quite indifferent about it. Let me clear a few things up for you. Bakugou's expression was stoic and his tone was casual. I'm not threatened by you. I just don't like you, and your Kambaya routine makes me want to hurl. If that pint-sized villainess has any good information, I have to vet it. You may not like my methods, but the Viper case is my case. You don't get to pick and choose how I do my fucking job. Thanks for helping us out, but I'm here to relieve you of that duty and hand the brat off to an agency. The two men looked at each other for a tense moment before Mirio licked his lips and turned back toward the door. You know, I always gave you the benefit of the doubt for being a dick, but I really have to say, jealousy doesn't look good on you. Bakugou stared back at him with a frown. Truthfully, he wasn't jealous of Mirio whatsoever, but saying so would only validate it in the other man's eyes. He didn't doubt Uraraka's feelings about their relationship at all, but Mirio was still half right. He was being a total douche, and he didn't really know why. Was he just that skeptical of Cho? Or was he too bogged down with other problems to focus entirely on the mission at hand? Bakugou cleared his throat and noticed that the other man was waiting for him to speak. Fine. I'll listen to the kid, but you need to start acting like a grown-up too, Mirio. She could be playing us, and you're cleaning the plate. She hasn't given me any reason to doubt her. Mirio seemed surprised by Bakugou's reply, but his demeanor also changed, truly realizing that Bakugou was possibly just that rough around the edges. She hasn't tried to run off. She's been perfectly reasonable, and she opened up to me about her home life. She's just a vulnerable kid that was dealt a crappy hand in life. A shit hand doesn't change the meaning of right and wrong. It's not an excuse. Bakugou sneered at his counterpart. I don't have all fucking day, so let's get this shit done. Mirio held his gaze on Bakugou for another second before pushing the door open again and going back inside. Sorry about that, Cho. He came back into the living room and both men took their seats again. Why don't you start again for us? Details. Bakugou slumped down on the sofa. Don't skimp on them. I need to know everything you know before I go back to Tokyo. Cho glanced between the men, picking up on the tension between them, but she nodded despite it. Okay. It had been 4 days since Uraraka had last seen Bakugou, but they texted all day long. Both of them were constantly busy, and it was driving her crazy. Quirking drugs had once again become available en masse earlier in the week, so she had worked crazy long hours to help the Etshot agency manage a massive portion of Tokyo, while Bakugou recovered from his injury and worked their new Viper lead. He didn't buy Cho's story at first, but he followed up on it regardless. As the days rolled by, Uraraka picked up on the subtle hints in his text that he was having a change of heart, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Her phone buzzed as she slumped down on the locker room bench, and she excitedly reached for it. It had been a really long shift for her today, and she was thrilled to have 2.5 days off. After another half-day tomorrow, she'd finally be able to take a break from working nonstop. Katsuki, alright, this shit is looking good. My informant wouldn't give me a straight answer about it. I'm going to take it to Etshot. Uraraka smiled down at the phone for a moment before typing out a response that agreed with him. She set the phone down again and went to work peeling off her costume that desperately needed to be washed. Once it was down to her waist, her phone buzzed again, and she didn't wait to finish undressing before she grabbed at it. Katsuki, you got plans tomorrow night, oh? Uraraka felt her heart flutter at the nickname. He'd taken quite the liking to calling her by her first name, and she couldn't find a single reason to complain about it. She was a little less generous with using his first name, but only because it was still really strange to call him by something so special and personal. Bakugou had always been just Bakugou to her, but now he was Katsuki. They felt like totally different people, and she couldn't quite wrap her head around it at times. She blushed at the thought of seeing him. She'd been keeping her chin up all week, patiently waiting for the right opportunity to come along that fit both their manic schedules. They texted a lot about how much they looked forward to it, and the possibility that this could be it sent her heart into a tailspin. Ochiko, I was about to ask you the same thing. She hit send and stared at the phone, her costume hung forgotten on her hips. She pursed her lips in anticipation, too excited to put the phone down and focus on anything else. He tended to text back quickly, so any moment now could be, Katsuki, I'll pick you up after work. Pack a swimsuit and whatever else you need for 2 days. You know what I mean. If she thought that she was in a tailspin before, she was wrong. She was soaring now, and she could help the excited giggle on her lips as she reread the text a dozen times. A weekend getaway with Bakugou? No. A weekend getaway with Katsuki. Where was he taking her? She'd need a swimsuit? Did she even own one? A million possibilities raced through her head as she typed out her response. She didn't know what she wanted to say, and she ended up rewriting it at least 3 times before she hit send. Kacchako. I can't wait. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.